Hi, I'm Rachel. When my husband inherited $62 million from his great-aunt's estate, I thought our struggling years were finally over. Instead, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Pack your bags. This money changes everything, and you're not part of my future anymore." What he didn't know was that his celebration would last exactly 24 hours before he came crawling back, begging me to save him from losing every single penny. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. By the time he realized what he'd thrown away, it was far too late. Before we begin, tell me this. Have you ever had someone completely change on you the moment they got a taste of power or money? What would you have done in my shoes? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October while I was grading papers at our small kitchen table in our cramped apartment in Millbrook Heights. The linoleum was peeling near the sink, and our ancient refrigerator hummed like it was gasping its last breath. I'd been teaching third grade for 6 years, stretching every dollar to help us get by while Trevor worked his way through law school. "Mrs. Rachel Hawthorne?" The voice was crisp, professional, carrying the weight of expensive legal offices. "This is Jonathan Whitmore from Whitmore Sterling and Associates in Ashford City. I'm calling regarding the estate of Gertrude Pemberton." Trevor's great-aunt Gertrude, the family eccentric who lived in that massive Victorian mansion outside town, surrounded by cats and conspiracy theories about the government. Trevor had visited her exactly twice in the 8 years I'd known him, both times dragging his feet because he found her embarrassing. "I'm afraid there's been a death in the family," Mr. Whitmore continued. "Miss Pemberton passed away peacefully in her sleep last Thursday. You and your husband are requested to attend the reading of the will tomorrow at 2 p.m. I hung up feeling that strange mixture of sadness and curiosity that comes with distant family deaths. Trevor had always dismissed Aunt Gertrude as a harmless but crazy old woman who collected vintage teacups and wrote angry letters to the mayor about fluoride in the water. We assumed she'd leave her cats to the animal shelter and maybe a few antique dishes to relatives. The next afternoon, we sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Whitmore, Sterling and Associates, surrounded by dark leather furniture that smelled like money and old books. Mr. Whitmore, a silver-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat and began reading from a thick document. "To my great-nephew, Trevor James Hawthorne, who, despite his neglect, carries the Pemberton blood." His voice droned through legal language until he reached the number that changed everything. The sum of $62,400,000 along with all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and personal property. The silence in that room was deafening. I felt Trevor's hand grip mine so tightly I thought he might break my fingers. $62 million. We'd been eating ramen noodles and splitting single meals at restaurants to save money. Our biggest luxury was the streaming service we shared with my sister. Mr. Whitmore continued reading, but I barely heard him over the sound of my own heartbeat. There were conditions about maintaining the family properties, something about charitable obligations, but all I could think about was how we could finally breathe, pay off Trevor's student loans, buy a real house, maybe even start the family we'd been putting off because we couldn't afford it. Trevor was unnaturally quiet during the drive home. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel of our 15-year-old Honda Civic, and he kept glancing at the manila envelope containing the estate documents like it might disappear if he looked away too long. "Can you believe it?" I whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might somehow jinx it. "Rachel, we're millionaires! We can actually have a life now!" He pulled into our apartment complex parking lot, but didn't turn off the engine. That's when I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. A hardness, a calculating look that made my stomach drop. "We need to talk," he said, staring straight ahead at the brick wall of our building. Inside our tiny living room, with its secondhand furniture and framed photos from our courthouse wedding 4 years earlier, Trevor sat across from me on the couch we'd bought at a garage sale. The envelope lay on our coffee table between us like evidence in a trial. "Rachel," he began, his voice oddly formal. "This inheritance, it's going to change everything." "I know," I said, reaching for his hand. "We can—" He pulled away. "No, you don't understand. This changes everything about us." The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean?" Trevor stood up and began pacing our small living room, stepping around the laundry basket that I hadn't had time to fold. "Rachel," he began, "this inheritance, it's going to change everything." "I know," I said, reaching for his hand. We can... No, you don't understand. This changes everything about us. What do you mean?
He turned to face me, and for a moment I didn't recognize the man I'd married. This wasn't the same person who'd held my hair back when I was sick with food poisoning last month, or who'd fallen asleep on my shoulder during movie nights because he was exhausted from studying. I'm saying that when you have this kind of wealth, you need to think strategically about partnerships that make sense, about building something bigger than... He gestured around our apartment with what looked like disgust. This. My hands started shaking. Trevor, we built this together. I worked 2 jobs to put you through law school. I've been supporting us while I what? While I prepared for a real career? Rachel, you teach elementary school. You make $32,000 a year. Do you have any idea what kind of world I'm entering now? The cruelty in his voice was like a physical blow. This was the man who used to brag to his friends about how I saved up for months to buy him a nice briefcase for his first internship, who'd cried when I surprised him with law review study guides I couldn't afford. I want you to pack your things, he said, his voice steady and cold. I'll give you until the weekend. I'm going to need this place to myself while I figure out my next moves. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for him to laugh and say he was kidding, but his face was set like stone. You're throwing me out, I said, the words barely a whisper. After everything we've been through, you're throwing me out because you got money? I'm being practical, he replied. But I caught a flicker of something, guilt maybe, before it disappeared behind that new, cold mask. You'll be fine. You have your job, your sister. You don't need me anymore. But we both knew the truth. He didn't need me anymore. Or at least he thought he didn't. I stood up on unsteady legs, looking around at our little apartment, at the life we'd built together with garage sale furniture and dollar store decorations and so much love, at the man I'd married who was looking at me like a stranger he needed to get rid of. You know what the cruelest part is, Trevor? I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I actually thought you were better than this. I thought we were better than this. He had the decency to look away. I walked to our bedroom, our former bedroom, and started pulling clothes from the dresser with shaking hands. Behind me, I could hear Trevor on the phone, his voice animated and excited as he called his brother Daniel to share the news. Not once did I hear him mention my name. As I folded my teaching clothes and packed my small jewelry box, I thought about the woman who made this moment possible. Great Aunt Gertrude with her cats and her conspiracy theories and her massive, lonely house. Had she known what kind of man her great-nephew really was? Had she seen something in him that I'd missed? Or had she simply been gambling on family blood over character? What I didn't know then, as I zipped up my suitcase with tears streaming down my face, was that Gertrude Pemberton had been far more clever than any of us imagined, and Trevor's celebration was about to become the shortest-lived victory in family history. By tomorrow night, he'd be knocking on my sister's door, desperate and panicked, begging me to come back and save him from the mess his arrogance had created. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly how a $62 million inheritance became Trevor's worst nightmare in less than 24 hours. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. I spent that first night on my sister Cassie's pull-out couch in her cramped studio apartment across town in Riverside Gardens. The springs dug into my back, but physical discomfort was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Trevor's face. Not the cruel stranger from earlier, but the man who used to wake me up with Caribou coffee and off-key singing on Sunday mornings. Cassie had taken one look at me standing in her doorway with my suitcase and red-rimmed eyes, pulled me inside, and poured 2 enormous glasses of wine without asking a single question. She always had that gift, knowing when to talk and when to just be present. He actually said you weren't part of his future anymore? She asked around midnight, both of us sitting cross-legged on her tiny kitchen floor, sharing a pint of ice cream straight from the container. I nodded, unable to trust my voice yet. Rachel, I've watched that man worship the ground you walk on for 4 years. This isn't Trevor talking. This is fear and greed and probably some terrible advice from his idiot brother Daniel.
But even as she said it, I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, because the Trevor who had coldly dismissed me felt very real, very calculated. Like maybe this version had always been there, just waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. Around 2 a.m., when Cassie had finally fallen asleep on her bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, thinking about Aunt Gertrude. I'd only met her twice. Once at our wedding, where she'd worn a bright purple hat with feathers and told me I had intelligent eyes, and once at a family barbecue, where she'd spent most of the evening arguing with Trevor's father about property taxes. Something nagged at me about the will reading. Not just the staggering amount of money, but the way Mr. Whitmore had rushed through certain sections. There had been conditions mentioned, something about charitable obligations and maintaining family properties. But in our shock over the inheritance amount, neither Trevor nor I had asked for clarification. I pulled out my phone and did something that felt slightly insane at 2:30 in the morning. I Googled Gertrude Pemberton. What I found made me sit up straight, suddenly wide awake. Gertrude Pemberton hadn't just been a rich, eccentric old woman. She'd been a brilliant businesswoman who'd built her fortune through strategic real estate investments starting in the 1960s. Before inheriting her family's modest savings, she'd put herself through business school, unusual for a woman in her era, and had spent 40 years quietly accumulating property throughout the county. But more interesting than her business acumen were the articles from the local newspaper archives. Local philanthropist funds new children's wing at Riverside Hospital. Anonymous donor establishes scholarship program for single mothers. Mystery benefactor saves historic Millbrook Community Center. Aunt Gertrude had been secretly funding half the charitable work in our county for decades. And, according to one article from 3 years ago, she'd been very particular about her giving, requiring detailed reports on how funds were used, conducting surprise visits to funded programs, and immediately cutting off support to any organization that mismanaged her donations. This wasn't a woman who gave away $62 million carelessly. My phone buzzed with a text message, making me jump. Trevor. Rachel, we should talk tomorrow. I may have been hasty. Come by around noon. I stared at the message, my heart doing that traitorous flutter it always did when I heard from him, even now. But something about the tone felt off. Not apologetic exactly, more like panicked. I screenshotted the message and sent it to my best friend Maya, who lived in Portland but kept vampire hours due to her job in tech. She responded immediately. Girl, that's not, I'm sorry I was a monster. That's, I need something from you. Do not go running back. But curiosity was eating at me. What could have possibly happened in less than 12 hours to make Trevor contact me? When I left, he'd been practically giddy, already making plans to quit his part-time job at the legal aid clinic, talking about buying a car that cost more than we'd made in 2 years combined. I spent the rest of the night reading everything I could find about Gertrude Pemberton, and by morning, a picture had emerged of a woman who was far more sophisticated than her family had realized. She'd been strategic, careful, and apparently very good at letting people underestimate her. At 7 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number with a local area code. Mrs. Hawthorne, this is Beverly Chen from the law offices of Whitmore, Sterling and Associates. Mr. Whitmore asked me to call you regarding some urgent matters related to the Pemberton estate. My stomach dropped. Is everything okay? Well, that's what we need to discuss. There are several time-sensitive requirements in Ms. Pemberton's will that require immediate attention. Mr. Whitmore tried reaching your husband, but his phone appears to be disconnected. Disconnected? Trevor never turned off his phone. He was practically surgically attached to the thing. I can be there in an hour, I said. I borrowed one of Cassie's blazers and took the bus to downtown Ashford City, my mind racing the entire 40-minute ride. When I walked into the imposing lobby of Whitmore, Sterling and Associates, Beverly Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, was waiting for me with a thick folder and what looked like genuine concern on her face. Mrs. Hawthorne, thank you for coming so quickly. We have a situation that requires immediate attention. She led me into the same mahogany-paneled conference room where our lives had changed yesterday, but this time the atmosphere was tense rather than celebratory. I'm afraid there are several conditions in Ms. Pemberton's will that weren't fully explained yesterday due to the overwhelming nature of the inheritance announcement. Conditions that have very specific deadlines. What does that mean exactly? It means that certain actions can void the inheritance entirely, including, but not limited to, abandoning family responsibilities, making financially reckless decisions, or, she paused, looking uncomfortable, dissolving a marriage for purely financial gain. The room spun slightly. She knew? Ms. Pemberton was very specific about this clause. She'd seen too many families destroyed by sudden wealth, and she wanted safeguards in place. Beverly pulled out another sheet. But that's not the most pressing issue. The inheritance comes with immediate charitable obligations that must be fulfilled within 48 hours of the will reading, or the entire estate reverts to the Pemberton Foundation.
What kind of obligations? A payment of $500,000 to the Riverside Children's Hospital, due by 5 p.m. today, a commitment to personally oversee the distribution of Christmas gifts to 200 low-income families, which requires presence at a planning meeting at 2 p.m. today, and the establishment of a $50,000 scholarship fund at Millbrook Community College, with paperwork that must be filed by close of business tomorrow. My head was spinning, and Trevor doesn't know about any of this? Beverly's expression grew more troubled. That's where we have a problem. We've been trying to reach Mr. Hawthorne since 6 a.m. His phone goes straight to voicemail, and when we sent someone to your listed address, the landlord said he'd seen your husband leave very early this morning with several suitcases. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Trevor had taken the money and run, not just from our marriage, but from all the responsibilities that came with Aunt Gertrude's carefully crafted inheritance. Mrs. Hawthorne, Beverly continued gently, there's something else. Miss Pemberton was very specific that if her primary beneficiary proved unsuitable, the inheritance would transfer to someone she trusted to honor her values, someone she believed had the moral character to handle both wealth and responsibility. She slid a sealed envelope across the table to me. My name was written on the outside in Gertrude's spidery handwriting. Inside, a letter dated 6 months before her death. Dear Rachel, if you're reading this, it means Trevor has shown his true colors faster than even I expected. I always liked you, dear. You have kind eyes and a good heart, and I could see how much you loved my foolish great-nephew, even when he didn't deserve it. I built my fortune through careful planning and hard work, but more importantly, I learned to see people for who they really are when tested. Trevor has never been tested, and I suspected he wouldn't handle it well. The money is yours now if you want it, but it comes with conditions, because wealth without purpose is just greed with a bank account. You'll need to prove yourself worthy over the next 6 months, just as I had to prove myself worthy of the opportunities life gave me. The first test is today. Can you step into shoes that Trevor couldn't fill? Can you honor commitments he's running from? I believe you can. I've been watching you for years, dear. The way you supported him through law school, the way you treat your students, the way you volunteer at the animal shelter, even when you can barely afford your own groceries. The choice is yours. Take the money and the responsibility, or let it all go to charity. Either way, you'll be free of a man who never deserved you. With hope and faith in your character, Gertrude. P.S. The first charitable payment is due at 5 p.m. today. I've arranged for a car to take you to the bank, and Beverly has all the necessary paperwork. Don't let me down. I looked up at Beverly, who was watching me with something that might have been hope. So, if I understand correctly, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, Trevor just forfeited $62 million by abandoning his responsibilities, and it's now mine if I can fulfill Gertrude's conditions? That's correct. The money is already being transferred into a new trust account in your name. You'll have access to it immediately for the charitable obligations, and full control after the 6-month probationary period, assuming you meet all the requirements.
I thought about Trevor, probably halfway to some expensive resort right now, thinking he'd won the lottery and escaped all consequences. I thought about our cramped apartment, about eating ramen noodles and sharing streaming passwords, and about all the dreams we'd put on hold because we couldn't afford them. And then I thought about 200 children who wouldn't get Christmas gifts, and a hospital wing that wouldn't get funding, and scholarships that wouldn't help struggling students like I used to be. "What do I need to do first?" I asked. Beverly smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "Well, we should probably start by getting you to that bank. And then you might want to think about what you're going to say when your husband realizes what he's given up and comes crawling back." Because he would come back. Men like Trevor always came back when they realized their miscalculations. The only question was whether I'd still be the same woman he'd so casually thrown away. Spoiler alert, I wouldn't be.
Patricia walked me through the process with the efficiency of someone who'd handled unusual requests before. The charitable payment to Riverside Children's Hospital needed to be completed by 5 p.m. It was now 11:30 a.m. The scholarship fund required establishing a new account with specific stipulations about how recipients would be selected. Each transaction required multiple signatures, documentation, and verification calls. Ms. Pemberton was extraordinarily detail-oriented, Patricia explained as she pulled up account information on her computer. Every charitable donation she made came with specific requirements about how the money would be used and detailed reporting on its impact. While Patricia prepared the paperwork, I found myself thinking about Trevor. Where was he right now? Had he checked his bank balance yet and discovered that the money hadn't been transferred as he'd expected? Or was he still riding high on the assumption that he'd escaped both marriage and responsibility in one clean break? "Mrs. Hawthorne?" Patricia's voice brought me back to the present. "I need to ask, are you prepared for the level of scrutiny that comes with this inheritance?" "What do you mean?" She leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Miss Pemberton didn't just leave you money. She left you a reputation to uphold. Her charitable work touched hundreds of lives in this community. The scholarship fund alone will have dozens of applicants twice a year. The hospital expects ongoing support for their children's programs. This isn't a one-time gift. It's a commitment to becoming the kind of person who handles wealth responsibly." The weight of it hit me fully for the first time. This wasn't just about proving I was better than Trevor or getting revenge for being abandoned. This was about stepping into a role that a brilliant woman had spent decades perfecting. "I teach 8-year-olds, I said quietly. "Yesterday I was worried about whether we could afford groceries. How am I supposed to manage millions of dollars?" Patricia smiled. "Miss Pemberton thought you might say something like that. She left instructions for that, too." She pulled out another sealed envelope, this one addressed to me in different handwriting. Inside was a business card for someone named Marcus Ashford, Financial Planning and Estate Management, along with a handwritten note. "Rachel, Marcus helped me learn to handle money when I was younger than you are now. He specializes in helping people transition into wealth responsibly. He's expecting your call. G." Marcus has been managing trust funds and teaching financial literacy for over 20 years, Patricia explained. "Miss Pemberton arranged for him to work with you during the probationary period at no cost." I stared at the business card. Even from beyond the grave, Gertrude was thinking 3 steps ahead. By 1 p.m., we'd completed the hospital payment and established the scholarship fund. Patricia walked me through the online portal where I could monitor the trust account, $61.5 million, minus the charitable obligations already fulfilled. The numbers felt abstract, like someone else's bank balance I was accidentally viewing. "Your next appointment is at the hospital," Beverly reminded me as we left the bank. "Dr. Sarah Fleming, the pediatric wing director, is expecting you at 2 p.m. for the Christmas gift planning meeting." The Children's Hospital was a short drive from downtown, a modern building with colorful murals painted on the exterior walls. Dr. Fleming met us in the lobby, a warm, energetic woman in her 40s wearing scrubs decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. "You must be Rachel," she said, shaking my hand with genuine warmth. "Miss Pemberton spoke about you several times over the years. She was very fond of you." That stopped me cold. She spoke about me? Oh, yes. She mentioned how you always remembered to ask about the cats when Trevor visited, and how you'd started a reading program at your school even though the district wouldn't fund it. She paid attention to things like that. Dr. Fleming led us through hallways lined with children's artwork to a conference room where 3 other staff members were waiting with clipboards, laptops, and the organized energy of people who made miracles happen on limited budgets. Every December, we provide Christmas gifts for 200 families whose children are patients here, Dr. Fleming explained. Ms. Pemberton funded this program for 8 years. Each family gets personalized gifts based on the children's ages and interests, plus grocery store gift cards to ensure they have a proper Christmas dinner. The logistics were staggering. Age-appropriate toys for kids ranging from infants to teenagers, special considerations for children with medical conditions, coordination with social workers to identify families most in need, distribution schedules that worked around hospital treatments and family circumstances. How did Gertrude manage all of this? I asked. She didn't just write checks, Dr. Fleming said with obvious admiration. She came to planning meetings, helped wrap gifts, and personally delivered presents to families who couldn't make it to the hospital. She knew dozens of these children by name. As they walked me through the process, I realized this was another test. Could I step into Gertrude's shoes not just financially, but personally? Could I care about these families the way she had? I'll need to learn all of this, the gift selection, the family coordination, all of it. I want to do this the way Gertrude did it. Dr. Fleming's smile was radiant. We were hoping you'd say something like that. Miss Pemberton left detailed notes about how she selected gifts, which local vendors give us the best prices, and which families have special circumstances we need to remember.
She handed me a thick binder. This is 8 years of Christmas program documentation. Miss Pemberton updated it every year. Flipping through the pages, I saw Gertrude's meticulous handwriting. Tommy Rodriguez, age 7, loves dinosaurs, but parents can't afford books. Include educational dinosaur encyclopedia. Maria Santos family, father recently unemployed. Include extra grocery card discreetly. Johnson twins, turning 10 in January. Coordinate so Christmas gifts don't overlap with birthday plans. She hadn't just been funding charity, she'd been building relationships, remembering details, treating each family like they mattered personally to her. By the time I left the hospital at 4 p.m., I had a new understanding of what I'd inherited. This wasn't just money, it was a network of responsibility and care that touched hundreds of lives. The Christmas program alone required coordination with 6 different social workers, 3 local toy stores, 2 grocery chains, and a volunteer network of gift wrappers and delivery drivers. Beverly dropped me back at Cassie's apartment as the sun was setting. I sat in my sister's tiny kitchen with Gertrude's binders spread across the table, trying to process everything I'd learned. The scholarship fund needed its first recipient selected within 2 months. The hospital expected me to attend monthly board meetings. There were quarterly reports to review and annual budget planning sessions to attend. "This is insane," I muttered, flipping through pages of financial statements and charitable impact reports. But underneath the overwhelming logistics, something else was growing, a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. In one day, I'd made decisions that would affect more lives than I'd touched in 6 years of teaching. The $500,000 hospital payment would fund medical equipment that would help sick children. The scholarship fund would send deserving students to college who otherwise couldn't afford it. My phone had been buzzing intermittently all afternoon with calls from unknown numbers. I'd been ignoring them, but as I sat there surrounded by Gertrude's careful documentation, curiosity got the better of me. 12 missed calls, 3 voicemails. The first was from someone claiming to be a financial advisor who'd heard about my windfall and wanted to schedule a meeting. Delete. The second was from a luxury car dealership offering to bring vehicles to me for private viewing. Delete. The third made my blood run cold. Rachel, it's me. I know you're angry, but you need to call me back immediately. Something's gone wrong. The money. There's a problem with the money. I'm at the Grandview Resort in Millbrook, room 1247. Please call me back. I think I made a mistake. Trevor. And he sounded terrified. I stared at the phone, my finger hovering over the callback button. Part of me, the part that had loved him for 4 years, that believed in our future together, wanted to call him immediately to find out what was wrong and how I could help. But a larger part of me, the part that was growing stronger by the hour, remembered the cold dismissal in our apartment yesterday. The way he'd looked at me like I was an obstacle to be removed. The casual cruelty of, "You're not part of my future anymore." Instead of calling back, I opened my laptop and did something I'd never thought I'd need to do. I Googled, "What to do when your ex-husband comes crawling back?" The first result was from a relationship advice blog. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. The second was from a financial advice site. Never let emotional manipulation override sound decision-making. The third was from a legal advice forum. Document everything. Screenshots, voicemails, witnesses. You never know when you'll need evidence. I screenshotted Trevor's contact information showing 12 missed calls in 4 hours. Then I saved his voicemail. Then I called Dr. Marcus Ashford, the financial advisor Gertrude had recommended. "Dr. Ashford, this is Rachel Hawthorne. Gertrude Pemberton arranged for us to work together. I think I'm going to need help sooner than expected." His voice was calm, professional, reassuring. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I've been expecting your call. Ms. Pemberton briefed me extensively on your situation. Why don't we meet first thing tomorrow morning? I have a feeling we're going to need to prepare you for some challenging conversations in the very near future." As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. "Rachel, please, I'm begging you. Call me back. I can't find the money anywhere, and the lawyers won't return my calls. Something's very wrong." I turned off my phone and went to bed. Tomorrow, I would start learning how to be the kind of person who could handle $62 million responsibly. Tonight, I would sleep on my sister's uncomfortable couch as a woman who had chosen dignity over desperation. Trevor could wait. He'd made me wait long enough. Dr. Marcus Ashford's office occupied the top floor of a glass building in downtown Ashford City, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. At 8 a.m. sharp, I sat across from him in a leather chair that probably cost more than my car, trying not to feel intimidated by the wall of financial certifications and awards behind his desk. Dr. Ashford was nothing like I had expected. Instead of the stuffy, formal advisor I'd imagined, he was a soft-spoken man in his 60s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades helping people navigate life-changing financial situations.
"Miss Pemberton told me quite a bit about you over the years," he began, pouring coffee from an elegant silver service. "She was convinced you had the character to handle wealth responsibly, but she also knew it would be a steep learning curve." He opened a thick file labeled with my name. "She asked me to prepare a comprehensive transition plan, assuming you'd need to move from financial survival mode to wealth management literally overnight." The plan was staggering in its thoroughness. Investment strategies, tax implications, charitable giving frameworks, legal protections, and what he called lifestyle management, guidance on how to handle the social and psychological challenges that came with sudden wealth. "First things first," Dr. Ashford said, sliding a document across his desk, "we need to establish some basic protections. New bank accounts that aren't tied to your previous financial life, updated insurance policies, and legal structures that will protect both you and the inheritance from potential challenges." "What kind of challenges?" His expression grew more serious. "Miss Pemberton was very specific about this. She expected your husband to attempt to claim the inheritance once he discovered what had happened. We need to ensure that's legally impossible." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Trevor again. I'd received 6 more calls and 4 text messages since yesterday evening, each more desperate than the last. Dr. Ashford noticed my glance at the phone. "How many times has he contacted you?" 23 calls, 8 text messages, and 3 voicemails since yesterday afternoon. That's escalating behavior. We should document everything and consider involving law enforcement if it continues. He made a note in my file.
But first, let's handle the immediate legal protections. We spent the next 2 hours establishing what Dr. Ashford called my financial fortress, new accounts at a private bank that specialized in high net worth clients, a legal trust structure that would protect the inheritance from any claims Trevor might attempt, updated insurance policies that reflected my new net worth, even a new credit card with a limit higher than my previous annual salary. This feels surreal, I admitted as we reviewed the paperwork. Yesterday, I was clipping coupons. Now I'm signing documents for millions of dollars. That's exactly why Miss Pemberton insisted on the 6-month probationary period. Sudden wealth can be psychologically devastating if not handled properly. She wanted to ensure you had time to adjust gradually with proper support systems in place. At 11 a.m., Beverly Chen arrived for our scheduled meeting about the next phase of charitable obligations. She looked more tense than she had the day before. "We have a situation," she announced without preamble. "Your husband showed up at our office this morning demanding to speak with Mr. Whitmore about what he's calling fraudulent manipulation of his inheritance." My stomach clenched. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. Mr. Whitmore refused to see him, and security escorted him out when he became belligerent. But he's threatening legal action, claiming you somehow coerced or tricked Miss Pemberton into changing her will." Dr. Ashford leaned forward. "That's exactly what Miss Pemberton predicted would happen. She prepared for this scenario as well." Beverly nodded and pulled out another sealed envelope. She left instructions to be opened only if the primary beneficiary challenged the will's validity. Inside was a USB drive and a letter in Gertrude's handwriting. "Rachel, if you're reading this, Trevor is likely making a fool of himself and threatening legal action. I anticipated this possibility and took precautions." The USB drive contains video recordings of every conversation I had with Trevor over the past 2 years, including several where he explicitly stated that he found me embarrassing and couldn't wait for me to finally kick the bucket so someone competent could handle the money. It also contains documentation of his financial irresponsibility. Gambling debts he hid from you, credit cards maxed out on luxury items, and a pattern of behavior that convinced me he would waste the inheritance within months. Most importantly, it contains my full psychological evaluation, completed just 3 months ago, proving I was of sound mind when I restructured my will in your favor. Trevor had his chance to prove himself worthy. He failed spectacularly. Use this information as needed to protect what is now rightfully yours. G. Beverly inserted the USB drive into her laptop, and we watched in stunned silence as video after video played. Trevor at last year's family barbecue, complaining loudly about having to visit crazy Aunt Gertrude, and speculating about when she'd die so he could finally get his hands on the family money. Trevor on the phone outside Gertrude's house telling someone, presumably his brother Daniel, that he was just playing nice with the old bat until she croaks.
No. He's going to keep escalating until someone talks to him, and honestly, I think I'm ready to face him now. I answered the call and put it on speaker. "Rachel, thank God, I've been trying to reach you for hours. Where are you?" His voice was frantic, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Gone was the cold, dismissive tone from 2 days ago. This Trevor sounded panicked and small. "I'm handling some business, Trevor. What do you need?" "What do I need? Rachel, the money is gone. All of it. The lawyers won't return my calls. The bank account they set up yesterday is frozen, and now they're saying there was some kind of mistake with the will. You have to help me figure this out." I looked at Dr. Ashford, who nodded encouragingly. "There was no mistake, Trevor. You forfeited the inheritance when you abandoned your responsibilities." "What are you talking about? What responsibilities?" "The charitable obligations that came with Gertrude's money, the hospital payment that was due yesterday, the Christmas program planning meeting you missed, the scholarship fund that had to be established within 48 hours, all the things you would have known about if you hadn't run away the moment you thought you were rich." Silence on the other end of the line. You knew about those things?" I
fulfilled those obligations, Trevor. All of them. That's why the money transferred to me, instead of disappearing into whatever luxury resort you're calling from. This is insane. His voice cracked. You can't just steal someone's inheritance because they didn't read the fine print. I didn't steal anything. You threw it away, just like you threw away our marriage. Dr. Ashford gestured for me to keep him talking. The more Trevor said, the more he would incriminate himself if this ever went to court. Rachel, please. I know I handled things badly the other day. I was overwhelmed. I wasn't thinking clearly. But this is $62 million we're talking about. We can work this out. We can fix our marriage and share the money like we should have from the beginning. The audacity took my breath away. Like we should have from the beginning? Trevor, 2 days ago, you told me I wasn't part of your future and threw me out of our apartment. Now you want to work things out because you discovered you can't handle the responsibilities that came with the money? I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Rachel. You can't destroy someone's life over one bad decision. I'm not destroying your life, Trevor. You did that yourself when you chose money over everything else, including me. Beverly was taking notes, documenting every word of the conversation. Dr. Ashford gave me a thumbs up. I was handling this better than I'd thought possible. Where are you right now? Trevor asked, his tone shifting to something that might have been meant to sound loving but came across as manipulative. Let me come see you. Let me explain properly. I love you, Rachel. I've always loved you. This inheritance thing just made me crazy for a few days. But I'm thinking clearly now. You're thinking clearly now because you're broke again, I said. Trevor, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Gertrude left detailed documentation of every conversation she had with you over the past 2 years, including the ones where you called her embarrassing and said you couldn't wait for her to die so you could get the money. Another long silence. She recorded our conversations? She recorded everything. Your gambling debts, your hidden credit cards, your complete disregard for the charitable work she'd spent decades building. She knew exactly who you were, Trevor. The only person who couldn't see it was me. Rachel, please. No, I'm done with please. I'm done with excuses. I'm done with you thinking you can treat people like disposable objects and then come crawling back when it's convenient. Beverly slid me a note. Perfect. Keep going. I'm going to hang up now, Trevor. If you continue harassing me with phone calls, I'll involve law enforcement. If you attempt to challenge the will, you'll be facing not just legal defeat, but public humiliation when those recordings become evidence. And if you come anywhere near me or my family, I'll take out a restraining order. You can't do this to me, Rachel. I'm your husband. No, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. You were my husband. You gave up that role when you decided I wasn't worth keeping. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. I hung up before he could respond and immediately turned off my phone. The room was silent for a moment. Then Dr. Ashford started clapping slowly. Miss Pemberton would be very proud. That was exactly the kind of strength she hoped you'd find. Beverly was grinning. And, legally speaking, you just gave us everything we'd need to shut down any challenge he might attempt. He essentially admitted to abandoning his responsibilities and confirmed that his current interest is purely financial. But I barely heard them. I was staring out the window at the city below, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Not anger, not sadness, not fear. Power. Quiet, steady, unshakable power. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't need anyone else's approval or permission. I had resources, support, purpose, and most importantly, I had chosen myself over someone who had chosen money over me.
3 days after my confrontation with Trevor, I was sitting in my new apartment, a furnished 2-bedroom in Maple Heights that Dr. Ashford had helped me secure while I figured out my long-term housing situation, when my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in a professional suit holding a manila envelope.
Rachel Hawthorne. I'm Detective Linda Morrison with the Ashford City Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. We need to talk. My blood ran cold. Had Trevor actually followed through on his legal threats? Was I in some kind of trouble? Detective Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen every kind of financial scam imaginable. She settled into my living room chair and opened her notepad. Mrs. Hawthorne, we've received some concerning information about your recent inheritance. Information that suggests there may be criminal activity involved. What kind of criminal activity? That's what we're trying to determine. 3 days ago, a man claiming to be Trevor Hawthorne filed a complaint alleging inheritance fraud, identity theft, and financial manipulation. He's claiming you somehow coerced an elderly woman into changing her will through what he calls undue influence. I stared at her, processing the audacity. He's accusing me of elder abuse? Among other things. But here's where it gets interesting. Detective Morrison flipped a page in her notepad. When we started investigating his claims, we discovered that Mr. Hawthorne himself is under investigation by our fraud division for something completely different. She pulled out a thick file. Are you aware that your husband has been running an illegal gambling operation out of a storage unit on the south side of town? The room spun slightly. What? Online poker games, sports betting, loan sharking to other law students who got in over their heads. We've been tracking the operation for 6 months, but we hadn't identified the ringleader until he came to us with this inheritance complaint and provided his full legal name and address. Detective Morrison spread several photographs across my coffee table. Screenshots of online gambling sites, bank records showing suspicious cash deposits, surveillance photos of Trevor meeting with known bookmakers. Mrs. Hawthorne, your husband has been running a criminal enterprise while using your shared address as his legal residence. That makes you potentially liable as an accomplice, unless you can prove you had no knowledge of his activities. I had no idea. My voice came out as a whisper. I thought his late nights were law school study groups. I thought the extra cash he sometimes had came from his part-time job. The part-time job at Legal Aid Services? Yes. Detective Morrison consulted her notes. He was fired from that position 4 months ago for stealing client funds. Did he tell you that? I sank back in my chair, feeling like the ground was disappearing beneath me. 4 months ago, Trevor had told me he'd gotten a raise and was being given more responsibility. I'd been so proud of him. Mrs. Hawthorne, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Your answers could determine whether you're charged as an accessory or treated as a victim. For the next hour, Detective Morrison walked me through every detail of our shared financial life over the past year, our shared bank account that Trevor managed because he was better with numbers, the times he'd come home with expensive clothes or electronics, claiming he'd gotten them on sale or from a friend, the mysterious phone calls he'd take in the other room saying they were study group coordination. Detective Morrison, I said finally, I need to show you something. I retrieved Gertrude's USB drive from my bedroom safe, another of Dr. Ashford's recommendations, and we watched the recordings together. Trevor bragging about his plans to liquidate Gertrude's assets, Trevor on the phone discussing betting lines and payment schedules while sitting in Gertrude's living room, Trevor casually mentioning that he'd found other income sources to help with law school expenses. My God, Detective Morrison muttered. He was using her house as his criminal headquarters. But the most damning footage was one I hadn't seen before. Apparently, Gertrude had cameras throughout her house. In this one, Trevor was in her study, photographing documents from her desk while she was in the kitchen making tea. Bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies. He was casing her, Detective Morrison said, planning how to access her money even before she died. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That's why he married me, isn't it? To get access to Gertrude. She was family by marriage, so I was his legitimate connection to her. Detective Morrison's expression was grim, but not unsympathetic. Mrs. Hawthorne, I've been investigating financial crimes for 15 years. What you're describing is called a long con. Using marriage to establish connections to potential victims is more common than you think. She closed her notepad and leaned forward. But here's what I find interesting about your case.
Miss Pemberton wasn't just a random victim. She was actively investigating your husband. What do you mean? We found her private files when we executed a search warrant on her house yesterday. She'd hired a private investigator 6 months ago to look into Trevor's activities. She knew about the gambling, the theft from legal aid services, even some of the people he was loaning money to at illegal interest rates.
Detective Morrison pulled out another folder. She documented everything, including evidence that Trevor had been forging your signature on several financial documents. Loan applications, credit card accounts, even a second mortgage application on property you didn't own. I felt sick. He was stealing my identity too? Among other things. But Miss Pemberton was building a case to protect you. She knew that when Trevor inevitably got arrested, you'd be vulnerable to charges as an accomplice unless someone could prove your innocence. The detective showed me copies of emails between Gertrude and her private investigator, a former FBI agent named James Carlisle. The correspondence painted a picture of an elderly woman who was far more sophisticated than anyone in her family realized, methodically building legal protection for a great niece-in-law she barely knew but genuinely cared about. James, I need to ensure Rachel isn't destroyed when Trevor's criminal activities are exposed. She's a good person married to a sociopath, and she has no idea what kind of danger she's in. I've confirmed that Trevor has been using Rachel's credit profile to secure gambling loans. If he defaults, which is inevitable given his debt levels, she could face criminal liability for debts she didn't know existed. The inheritance restructuring needs to happen quickly. Once Trevor is arrested, his creditors will come after any assets they can claim, including Rachel's teaching income and their shared property. "She saved me," I whispered. "She knew he was going to destroy my life, and she saved me before I even knew I needed saving." Detective Morrison nodded. Miss Pemberton gave us everything we needed to build a case against your husband while simultaneously protecting you from criminal liability. She even arranged for her lawyer to provide you with legal representation if needed. Over the next 2 hours, Detective Morrison walked me through the scope of Trevor's criminal activities. He owed over $200,000 to various gambling creditors, some of whom were connected to organized crime. He'd been using our apartment as a meeting place for loan shark operations, putting me at physical risk from dangerous people I'd never known were in my life. The inheritance complaint he filed against you was actually his attempt to claim assets he could use to pay off gambling debts, Detective Morrison explained. He wasn't trying to win you back. He was trying to access money he thought he could use to save his own life. What happens now? We arrest him, tonight, probably. The evidence Miss Pemberton collected, combined with our own investigation, gives us enough for charges of fraud, theft, identity theft, racketeering, and about 6 other felonies. Detective Morrison stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I want you to understand something. You were married to a career criminal who was using you as cover for increasingly dangerous activities. If Miss Pemberton hadn't intervened when she did, you'd likely be facing charges right alongside him, even though you were as much a victim as anyone else he defrauded." After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment trying to process the magnitude of what I'd learned. The man I'd loved, supported, and sacrificed for during 4 years of marriage had been systematically destroying my life while planning to abandon me the moment he got access to money. But Gertrude had seen it coming and had spent the last months of her life building a legal fortress around me. My phone rang. Dr. Ashford. "Rachel, I just heard from Beverly Chen. The police have arrested Trevor at his hotel. It's going to be all over the news within hours, and you need to be prepared for media attention." "What kind of media attention?" "The story is going to be law students' double life exposed, gambling ring, elder fraud, identity theft. Your name will probably come up as both his wife and the person who inherited the money he thought he was entitled to." I thought about my students, my colleagues at school, my neighbors. By tomorrow, everyone would know that I'd been married to a criminal. "Dr. Ashford, am I going to be okay?" "Rachel, you're going to be more than okay. Miss Pemberton made sure of that.
But you need to decide right now what kind of person you want to be going forward. The woman who hides from the scandal, or the woman who uses her position to help other people avoid what you've been through. As I hung up, I realized that Gertrude's final gift hadn't just been money or legal protection. She'd given me the chance to transform the worst betrayal of my life into something meaningful. Trevor had tried to use me as a stepping stone to wealth and ended up in handcuffs, but I was just getting started. The local news truck was parked outside my apartment building when I got home from school the next afternoon. A blonde reporter in a red blazer stood on the sidewalk practicing her opening lines while a cameraman adjusted his equipment behind her. "Local teacher inherits millions after husband's arrest in gambling scandal," she rehearsed. The question tonight was Rachel Hawthorne an innocent victim or a willing accomplice? I ducked around to the building's rear entrance, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my keys. Dr. Ashford had warned me this was coming, but seeing it in person felt surreal and terrifying.
My phone had been buzzing constantly since Trevor's arrest hit the morning news. Reporters, producers, true crime podcasters, and several people claiming to be documentary filmmakers all wanted to tell my story. Most disturbing were the social media messages. Strangers who'd somehow found my personal accounts despite my privacy settings. Some were supportive. "Girl, you dodged a bullet. Glad you got away from that criminal." Others were viciously suspicious. She had to know what he was doing. Nobody's that naive. She probably helped him steal from that old lady. The worst were from Trevor's gambling associates, threatening messages that Detective Morrison had told me to report immediately. "Your husband owes serious people serious money. His debts don't disappear just because he's in jail." I'd barely gotten inside my apartment when my building's intercom buzzed. The reporter. "Ms. Hawthorne, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I wonder if we could have just a few minutes of your time to get your side of the story?" I didn't answer, but she kept trying. "Ms. Hawthorne, there are some serious allegations being made about your involvement in your husband's activities. Don't you want a chance to defend yourself?" My phone rang. Beverly Chen. "Rachel, don't talk to any reporters without legal representation present. Someone leaked details about Trevor's criminal activities, and they're painting you as either a victim or a co-conspirator, depending on which narrative gets better ratings." "What kind of details?" "Everything. The gambling operation, the identity theft, the fact that he was using Gertrude's house as a meeting place for illegal activities. But they're also reporting on your inheritance, and some people are suggesting it's too convenient that you ended up with the money right before Trevor got arrested." Through my window, I could see more news vans arriving. My quiet residential street was turning into a media circus. "Beverly, how is this legal? Can they just camp outside my home and harass me?" "Unfortunately, yes. You're part of a major news story now. But we can use this to our advantage if we're strategic about it." "What do you mean?" "Gertrude's private investigator, James Carlisle, has agreed to go on record about the investigation she commissioned. He has documentation proving you were completely unaware of Trevor's criminal activities and that Gertrude specifically structured the inheritance to protect you." An hour later, Dr. Ashford arrived with James Carlisle, a distinguished man in his 50s who looked like he'd stepped out of a detective novel. We sat in my kitchen while news crews swarmed outside. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Carlisle began, opening a thick briefcase. "Miss Pemberton hired me 6 months ago not just to investigate your husband, but to protect you from the fallout when his activities were exposed." He spread photographs across my kitchen table. Trevor meeting with known criminals. Trevor using my credit information at various banks. Trevor photographing documents in Gertrude's house. She was building a case to prove your innocence before you even knew you needed protecting. But more than that, she was documenting Trevor's systematic manipulation of your marriage. He showed me recorded phone conversations where Trevor discussed his long-term plans to access Gertrude's money through me. Voice recordings of him laughing about how clueless I was about his other activities. Text messages where he referred to our marriage as a business arrangement with financial benefits. "Mrs. Hawthorne, your husband married you specifically because you were Gertrude's great niece by marriage. This was a calculated multi-year con."
My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I'd stopped answering these, but Carlisle gestured for me to pick up and put it on speaker. Rachel, this is Daniel Hawthorne, Trevor's brother. We need to talk. Daniel. The brother had supposedly been too busy to attend our father-in-law's funeral. The one Trevor had called immediately after getting the inheritance news. What do you want, Daniel? Look, I know things are complicated right now with Trevor's legal situation, but we need to discuss the family money. That inheritance rightfully belongs to the Hawthorne family, and we can't let personal problems get in the way of what's fair. Carlisle was taking notes, documenting everything. Personal problems? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Daniel, your brother was running a criminal operation out of our apartment. He stole my identity, forged my signature, and put my life in danger. These aren't personal problems, these are felonies. Rachel, you're being dramatic. Trevor made some mistakes, but family is family. We need to work together to sort this out. What exactly are you proposing? Split the inheritance. Half to you, half to Trevor's legal defense fund and outstanding debts. It's the family thing to do. Dr. Ashford shook his head vigorously, pointing to a note he had written. This conversation is being recorded by them too. Daniel, Trevor forfeited any claim to that money when he abandoned his legal responsibilities and fled the state. The inheritance is mine, legally and morally. Come on, Rachel. You can't seriously believe an old woman with dementia making last-minute changes to her will should override decades of family planning. That was it. Gertrude didn't have dementia, Daniel. She had a team of doctors and lawyers who evaluated her mental capacity specifically because she anticipated challenges like this. She was sharper than anyone in your family ever gave her credit for. This is ridiculous. Trevor is my brother, and I'm not going to let you destroy his life over some money.
I'm not destroying his life. His criminal choices destroyed his life. I'm just refusing to be destroyed along with him. I hung up and immediately called Detective Morrison to report the call as potential witness intimidation. Within hours, the story exploded beyond local news. National media picked up the narrative. Teacher inherits $62 million after husband's criminal double life exposed. Cable news shows featured legal experts debating whether I could have been truly unaware of Trevor's activities. But the story took an unexpected turn when Carlisle's evidence became public. Channel 7 aired excerpts from Trevor's recorded conversations, including the ones where he laughed about manipulating me and planned to abandon me once he had access to Gertrude's money. Public sentiment shifted dramatically. Social media comments changed from suspicion to support. This woman was married to a sociopath who was planning to destroy her life for money. Thank God that elderly lady was smart enough to protect an innocent person. Anyone who thinks she should share this money with her criminal ex-husband is insane. The most powerful moment came when Channel 7 aired security footage from Gertrude's house, showing Trevor attempting to break into her safe while she was in the hospital for what turned out to be her final illness. He was literally trying to steal from her while she was dying, the news anchor reported. This wasn't a family dispute over inheritance. This was a criminal attempting to defraud an elderly woman and manipulate his wife as an accessory. That evening, my doorbell rang again. Through the peephole, I saw a teenage girl holding a bouquet of flowers. Miss Hawthorne, I'm Emma Rodriguez. My little brother Tommy is one of the kids in the hospital Christmas program that Miss Pemberton used to fund. I heard on the news that you're continuing her work. I opened the door, and Emma handed me the flowers along with a handwritten note. Thank you for making sure the Christmas program continues. Tommy has leukemia, and last Christmas was really hard for our family. The gifts Miss Pemberton arranged meant everything to us. When we heard she died, we thought the program might end, but then we saw on the news that you're taking over. Our whole family wanted to say thank you. Behind Emma, I noticed neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. Not reporters or cameras, but actual people from my community. Mrs. Patterson from downstairs, holding a casserole. The young couple from across the hall with their twin toddlers. The elderly man from the end unit who always helped carry groceries. "We wanted to show support," Mrs. Patterson said. "What that man did to you was terrible, but we've seen how you treat people. You're good people, Rachel." One by one, they shared stories I'd never known they'd noticed. How I'd helped Mrs. Patterson when she fell on the ice last winter. How I'd babysat for the young couple during their emergency. How I'd driven the elderly man to medical appointments when his car was in the shop. The news crews caught all of it. My neighbors forming a protective circle, sharing testimony about my character, defending me against accusations that I'd been complicit in Trevor's crimes. That footage aired nationally with the headline, "Community Rallies Around Teacher Who Inherited Millions After Husband's Betrayal." The narrative was now complete. I wasn't a suspicious wife who might have been involved in criminal activities. I was a good person who'd been systematically deceived by a sociopath, protected by a wise elderly woman, and supported by a community that had seen my true character long before the world was watching. But the most satisfying moment came at 11 p.m. when Detective Morrison called with an update. "Mrs. Hawthorne, Trevor's legal team just contacted the prosecutor's office. He wants to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "He's offering to plead guilty to all charges and provide information about his criminal associates in exchange for a reduced sentence. But here's the interesting part. His lawyers specifically asked whether pleading guilty would affect any potential claim to your inheritance." I laughed, actually laughed for the first time in weeks. What did the prosecutor tell them? That ship sailed when he forfeited the inheritance by abandoning his legal obligations. But more importantly, pleading guilty to criminal fraud would make any future claim to those assets legally impossible. As I hung up, I realized that Trevor's desperation was complete. He'd lost the money, lost his freedom, lost his reputation, and now he was losing his leverage in plea negotiations because he still couldn't accept that the inheritance was permanently beyond his reach. Outside my window, the news crews were packing up. The story was shifting from scandal to inspiration. The teacher who'd been betrayed but emerged stronger. The elderly woman who'd protected someone she barely knew. The community that stood by a neighbor in crisis. Tomorrow, I had a meeting with the hospital board about expanding the children's programs. Next week, I was scheduled to review scholarship applications for the fund Gertrude had established. But tonight, for the first time since this entire ordeal began, I felt something approaching peace. 6 weeks after Trevor's arrest, I was reviewing scholarship applications in my new home office when my doorbell rang. Through the security system Dr. Ashford had insisted on installing, I could see a woman in her 60s standing on my porch, holding what appeared to be a large wooden box.
"Ms. Hawthorne? I'm Margaret Pemberton Hayes, Gertrude's younger sister. I believe we need to talk." I'd never met Margaret, though I'd heard Gertrude mention her occasionally. She lived in Portland and rarely visited, but she'd sent a beautiful flower arrangement to Gertrude's funeral. Margaret was elegantly dressed, with silver hair and intelligent eyes that reminded me strongly of her sister. She carried herself with the same quiet confidence that Gertrude had possessed. "I apologize for arriving unannounced," she said as I invited her in, "but I have something that Gertrude specifically asked me to deliver to you personally, and only after Trevor's legal situation was resolved." She set the wooden box on my dining room table. It was beautifully crafted, with brass hinges and Gertrude's initials carved into the lid. Gertrude was always the planner in our family. Even as children, she thought 3 steps ahead of everyone else. When she decided to restructure her will in your favor, she knew there would be consequences she couldn't predict. So she prepared for multiple scenarios. Margaret opened the box, revealing layers of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be several sealed envelopes. This is what she called her nuclear option. Evidence she hoped would never be necessary, but kept in case Trevor's criminal activities extended beyond what even she had discovered. The first document Margaret showed me was a psychological profile of Trevor commissioned from a forensic psychologist who specialized in criminal behavioral patterns. Dr. Catherine Webb evaluated Trevor without his knowledge, based on recordings of his conversations with Gertrude and analysis of his behavioral patterns. Her conclusion was that Trevor exhibited classic signs of antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic features. I read Dr. Webb's report with growing horror. It detailed Trevor's manipulation techniques, his complete lack of empathy for his victims, and his escalating criminal behavior that suggested he would eventually graduate to more serious offenses. The most disturbing part, Margaret continued, is Dr. Webb's assessment that Trevor was likely planning to harm Gertrude physically if she hadn't died of natural causes when she did. She showed me security footage I hadn't seen before. Trevor attempting to enter Gertrude's bedroom while she slept, only to be deterred by her cat knocking over a lamp. Trevor researching untraceable poisons on Gertrude's computer. Trevor discussing with an unknown associate whether the old lady might have an accident that would speed up the inheritance process. My sister was literally in fear for her life during her final months, but she was more concerned about protecting you than protecting herself. The next set of documents revealed the true scope of Trevor's criminal network. The gambling operation was just one part of a larger fraud scheme involving identity theft, insurance fraud, and what appears to be money laundering for organized crime figures. Gertrude's private investigator uncovered connections between Trevor and a criminal organization that specialized in inheritance acceleration. They identify wealthy elderly people with exploitable family connections, then use those connections to gain access to assets through fraud, manipulation, or worse. According to the documents, Trevor had been recruited by this organization during his first year of law school. His marriage to me wasn't just about accessing Gertrude. I was what they called a credibility anchor, someone whose legitimate profession and clean background would provide cover for increasingly sophisticated criminal activities. Rachel, you were never Trevor's wife in any meaningful sense. You were a carefully selected asset in a long-term criminal enterprise. Margaret opened one of the sealed envelopes. Inside was a letter from Gertrude dated just 3 weeks before her death. My dear Rachel, if Margaret is reading you this letter, it means the situation has escalated beyond even my worst fears. The evidence in this box represents the final pieces of a puzzle I've been assembling for over a year. Trevor didn't just marry you to access my money. He was part of a criminal organization that has been systematically targeting elderly people across 3 states. You were his cover, his legitimacy, and eventually you would have been his fall guy. The organization's pattern is consistent. Recruit young criminals with access to wealthy elderly targets, then provide them with false identities and criminal expertise, then execute sophisticated long-term cons that can net millions per victim. But their most diabolical element is how they eliminate loose ends. The criminal who provides access to the target is eventually arrested on seemingly unrelated charges, while their spouse or family member is left to face civil and criminal liability for the crimes. In other words, my dear, Trevor was always planning to destroy you. But I wouldn't let that happen. The inheritance was never just about money. It was about providing you with the resources to survive what was coming and the legal protection to ensure that you wouldn't be destroyed by his criminal choices. I'm sorry you had to endure the pain of betrayal, but I hope you understand that saving you required letting you experience the full truth of who Trevor really was. Use this evidence wisely, my dear. All my love, Gertrude. I sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of what Gertrude had uncovered and prevented. Trevor hadn't just been a gambling addict who got in over his head. He'd been a professional criminal who had specifically targeted me as part of a larger operation. Margaret, does this mean there are other victims? Other people like me? That's exactly what it means. And Gertrude wanted to make sure you had the resources to help them.
Margaret showed me a list of 12 other cases across Oregon, Washington, and California where similar patterns had been identified. Young criminals with gambling problems recruited to target elderly family members. Wives and family members left to face criminal charges, while the primary perpetrators received mysteriously lenient plea deals. The FBI is now investigating this as a multi-state organized crime operation, thanks to the evidence Gertrude collected. But the civil cases, helping the families who were victimized, that's going to require private resources. She pulled out the final envelope. Gertrude established a separate legal fund with $10 million specifically designated to provide legal defense for the innocent family members caught up in these schemes. She wanted you to oversee it. The scope of Gertrude's foresight was breathtaking. She hadn't just saved me. She had identified a pattern of criminal activity that was destroying innocent families and had set up a system to fight back. There's something else, Margaret said. Trevor's criminal organization had backup plans if their primary scheme failed. According to Gertrude's investigator, they were planning to frame you for financial crimes to divert attention from their own activities. She showed me forged documents with my signature, fake email accounts created in my name, and evidence that Trevor had been building a case to paint me as the mastermind behind his criminal activities. If Gertrude hadn't restructured her will and protected you legally, you'd likely be facing federal charges right now, while Trevor and his associates walked away with plea deals. My phone rang. Detective Morrison. Rachel, I need you to come to the police station immediately. We've had a major development in Trevor's case. An hour later, I sat in Detective Morrison's office while she explained that Trevor's criminal organization had been completely dismantled. Using evidence that Gertrude had provided through her estate lawyers, the FBI had arrested 17 people across 4 states. Your husband wasn't just a gambling addict, Mrs. Hawthorne. He was what we call a honey trap operator for a sophisticated criminal enterprise. His job was to identify and marry women who could provide access to wealthy, elderly targets. She showed me a chart connecting Trevor's case to 12 other similar schemes. Every one of these criminals followed the same pattern: marry someone with access to inheritance money, build a criminal operation while using their spouse as unwitting cover, then frame the spouse for financial crimes while they negotiated plea deals. How many innocent people were involved? 23 wives, girlfriends, or family members. Most of them are now facing criminal charges or civil lawsuits, completely unaware that they were victims of a coordinated criminal enterprise. Detective Morrison slid a document across her desk. Except for you, Miss Pemberton's legal preparations and the evidence she collected make you the only one with both the resources and the legal protection to help the others. That evening, I met with Dr. Ashford and Beverly Chen to discuss the legal fund Gertrude had established. The scope of what we could accomplish was overwhelming. We can provide legal defense for innocent family members, fund investigations into similar criminal enterprises, and work with law enforcement to identify future victims, Beverly explained. But more than that, Dr. Ashford added, we can create a model for how to protect vulnerable elderly people from these sophisticated criminal operations. As I drove home that night, I thought about the full circle of Gertrude's plan. She had started by trying to protect one great niece-in-law she barely knew. But in the process, she'd uncovered and helped dismantle a criminal organization that was destroying families across multiple states. The inheritance hadn't just saved me. It had equipped me to save others. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Hawthorne, this is Lisa Chen from Sacramento. The FBI told me about the legal fund Miss Pemberton established. My husband was part of the same criminal organization as Trevor, and I'm facing charges for crimes I didn't know were happening. Can you help me? I pulled over and called her immediately. By the end of our conversation, I understood that my new life wasn't just about managing wealth or continuing Gertrude's charitable work. It was about using every resource at my disposal to ensure that what happened to me, what almost happened to me, would never destroy another innocent person. Trevor had tried to use me as a stepping stone to wealth and ended up exposing and destroying the criminal enterprise he was part of. But I was just getting started with the real work Gertrude had prepared me for. 1 year later, I stood in the main conference room of the Pemberton Foundation headquarters, a building that had once housed Gertrude's business offices and now served as the center for our victim assistance programs. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the valley where Gertrude had built her first real estate investment 40 years earlier. The conference table was surrounded by 15 women and 3 men, all survivors of what the FBI now called the Inheritance Acceleration Network. Lisa Chen from Sacramento sat to my right, having become the foundation's West Coast coordinator after her husband's conviction. Across from her was Janet Williams from Portland, whose brother-in-law had nearly succeeded in framing her for his embezzlement schemes before our legal team intervened. "Before we begin today's quarterly review," I said, looking around the table at faces that had become family over the past 12 months, "I want to read something that arrived this morning." I held up a handwritten letter from a teenager in Phoenix. "Dear Mrs. Hawthorne and the Pemberton Foundation.
My name is Alex Martinez. 6 months ago, my mom was facing 20 years in federal prison for crimes my stepdad committed. She didn't even know he was using her name to steal from his grandmother until the FBI arrested her at her job in front of all her coworkers. Your lawyers saved her life, not just her freedom, her actual life, because she was talking about killing herself rather than going to prison for something she didn't do. She's home now, and she started college last month using one of your scholarships for victims' families. I wanted you to know that what you're doing matters to people you'll never meet. Thank you for giving me my mom back. Alex." The room was quiet for a moment, then Lisa spoke up. "That makes 47 successful cases this year," she said, consulting her tablet. 47 families who didn't lose everything because of crimes they didn't commit. Janet nodded. "And the prevention program has identified 12 potential schemes before they could fully develop. That's potentially hundreds of future victims we've protected." Over the past year, the Pemberton Foundation had evolved far beyond what even Gertrude had envisioned. What started as a legal defense fund for inheritance fraud victims had become a comprehensive support system for anyone targeted by sophisticated criminal organizations that used family relationships as weapons. We provided legal representation, financial assistance for families destroyed by criminal spouses, counseling services for people struggling with betrayal trauma, and most importantly, education programs that taught people how to recognize manipulation and protect themselves from criminal exploitation. "The impact report is ready for review," said Dr. Sarah Kim, our program director, and a former FBI financial crimes investigator, who'd joined us 6 months earlier. "We've assisted 127 victims across 8 states, recovered over $12 million in stolen assets, and contributed evidence to 34 federal prosecutions." But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture the real transformation that had occurred, not just in the lives we'd helped, but in my own understanding of what wealth and power could accomplish when used purposefully. After the meeting, I drove to the cemetery where Gertrude was buried. I'd gotten into the habit of visiting her grave every few months, updating her on the foundation's progress and asking for guidance when difficult decisions arose. Her headstone was simple: Gertrude Pemberton, 1934, 2024. She saw clearly and acted decisively. "Well, Gertrude," I said, settling into the folding chair I kept in my car for these visits, "I think you'd be proud of what we've built, though I suspect you knew all along it would grow into something bigger than either of us originally imagined." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the peaceful cemetery, and I found myself reflecting on how completely my life had changed. Not just the money or the foundation work, but my fundamental understanding of my own strength and value. My phone buzzed with a text from Cassie. "Dinner at 6?
I made that pasta dish you love. And I have news. I smiled, remembering the sister who'd taken me in when my world collapsed, who'd sat with me on her kitchen floor sharing ice cream and indignation. Cassie had recently gotten engaged to a wonderful man named Peter, and she'd asked me to help plan their wedding, and a request that would have been impossible to fulfill financially just 18 months ago. On the drive home, I passed the Grandview Resort where Trevor had been staying when his world fell apart. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd chosen the most expensive hotel in town for his celebration, spending money he didn't actually have access to, while I slept on a pull-out couch, unaware that I was about to inherit millions. According to Detective Morrison, Trevor had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and would likely serve at least 8. His criminal organization had been completely dismantled, and several of its leaders were facing life sentences for charges ranging from elder abuse to conspiracy to commit murder. Trevor himself had become something of a cautionary tale in legal circles, a case study in how criminal arrogance could lead to spectacular self-destruction. His attempt to defraud his great-aunt had not only failed, but had exposed and destroyed an entire criminal network. I no longer felt angry when I thought about him. The betrayal still stung sometimes, but it was overwhelmed by gratitude for the life his criminality had inadvertently made possible. That evening at Cassie's apartment, she shared her news over wine and homemade pasta. "Peter and I have been talking about the wedding," she began, her eyes bright with excitement, "and we want to do something meaningful with it. Instead of expensive flowers and fancy decorations, we want to ask guests to make donations to the Pemberton Foundation." She pulled out a handwritten note. "We want to include this with the invitations. In honor of Rachel Hawthorne, whose strength in the face of betrayal inspired us to believe that love wins over greed and good people can triumph over those who try to destroy them." Tears sprang to my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of how much love I'd gained after losing what I thought was love. "Cassie, that's beautiful, but you don't need to center your wedding around me. Rachel, you saved our faith in people. After watching what Trevor did to you, Peter and I were scared to trust anyone completely. But seeing how you handled everything, how you turned such an awful situation into something that helps other people, it made us believe that there really are good people in the world who deserve to be loved and protected."
Later that night, alone in the home I'd bought in the hills overlooking Ashford City, a modest house by mansion standards, but with a perfect view of the valley and space for an office where I could work on foundation business, I opened my laptop to review the week's correspondence. Letters from victims asking for help, updates from FBI agents working on related cases, invitations to speak at conferences about financial fraud prevention, thank you notes from families we'd assisted. And one email that made me pause, from Jennifer Walsh, the Channel 7 reporter who'd first covered my story. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I hope this email finds you well. I'm working on a follow-up piece about the Inheritance Acceleration Network prosecutions, and I'd love to interview you about the Foundation's work. But more than that, I wanted to personally thank you. Your story changed my approach to journalism. Instead of looking for scandal and victimization, I started looking for stories about resilience and people using their worst experiences to help others. You taught me that sometimes the most important story isn't the crime that was committed, but what people choose to build after surviving it. Would you be available for a brief conversation? Jennifer Walsh." I smiled and typed back a brief response agreeing to the interview. The story had come full circle, from scandal to inspiration, from personal betrayal to systemic change. Before closing my laptop, I opened the document I'd been working on for months, a memoir about the experience, tentatively titled The Inheritance of Betrayal: How One Woman's Worst Day Became Her Greatest Purpose. Dr. Ashford had encouraged me to write it, arguing that my story could help other people recognize manipulation and protect themselves from similar schemes. The publisher was enthusiastic, and we planned to donate all proceeds to the foundation. I read the final paragraph I'd written. Gertrude Pemberton never intended to make me wealthy. She intended to make me powerful. Not the kind of power that comes from money, but the kind that comes from understanding your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. Trevor thought he was using me to access something valuable. What he actually did was teach me that I had always been the most valuable thing in the equation. I just hadn't known it yet. The $62 million was never really about the money. It was about having the resources to become the person I was always capable of being, but had never been given the chance to discover. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up revealing our greatest strengths. Sometimes betrayal becomes the foundation for a life we never could have imagined. And sometimes the quiet choice to value yourself over someone who doesn't value you becomes the loudest statement you'll ever make. I saved the document and closed my laptop. Through my office window, I could see the lights of Ashford City twinkling in the valley below. Somewhere out there, people were struggling with betrayal, manipulation, and financial abuse. Tomorrow, the foundation would continue working to help them. But tonight, I was simply Rachel. Not the teacher who'd been abandoned, not the heiress who'd been betrayed, not the foundation director who helped crime victims. Just a woman who had learned to see herself clearly and act decisively, much like the remarkable woman who'd made it all possible. I thought about Trevor, probably lying awake in his federal prison cell, still convinced that he'd been cheated out of something that was rightfully his, still unable to understand that the only thing he'd ever truly lost was someone who'd loved him unconditionally, something worth far more than $62 million, and something no amount of money could ever buy back. The inheritance had taught me many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was this: the greatest wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you choose to do with whatever you're given. And the most powerful revenge isn't destroying someone who wronged you. It's becoming someone they could never diminish, no matter how hard they tried.